Will you pray with me, please? Holy One, may we be not limited by ourselves, but may we fly by the power of your love. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts bring healing finally to our world. Amen. Amen. These words this morning from 1 John, not to be confused with the Gospel of John. 1 John was probably written to the community that also read the Gospel of John. And they were all people who lived about 100 years after the time of Jesus. 100 years is a long time. 100 years is long enough to start to lose your way. And then the church, want to come up and preach?
No, she wants to come sit with me.
No, I don't know, you have to take her with Melinda.
Melinda, I'm the preacher's wife.
There in that church about 100 years after Jesus, there was starting to be a problem, an identity problem. We can probably understand that, can't we? Here we are, about 50 or so years after the launch of the gay rights movement, and we seem to be struggling with our identity a little bit. Do you agree with that? So there was an identity problem. And to boil it down to the basics of what was going on, it was this. There were teachers, they like to think of themselves as enlightened ones in the congregation, and they were going around and they were saying that yes, Jesus came, but he never came here on earth in the flesh. He was always just a spiritual being. And so because of this, they were teaching that being a Christian is really all about just being spiritual, and it's about one's own spiritual growth. We used to tease at NCC San Francisco whenever we had a guest speaker who came who was a little bit fond of themselves. We'd say, oh, they'd say, enough about Jesus, let's talk about me. So it was a little bit like that. And they looked down on others who hadn't attained this spiritual maturity and who didn't agree with this doctrine. And these teachers were going around saying, this is how we should be, just spiritually enlightened and mature. And they were ignoring the needs of the poor and the hungry and those who were suffering around them so they could focus on their spiritual growth. Sound familiar? So there was this new identity seeping in that said that following Jesus is really just about following a purely spiritual path and becoming spiritually advanced and not really much about anything else. But the writer of 1 John, who was probably an elder in the community, probably old because he, I'm going to assume it was a male, liked to refer to the people as children. As in, children, listen to me. Children, listen. And they wrote this letter to say, children, no. Remember your identity. Remember who you are. You are followers of Jesus, who came here on this earth in the flesh, who showed love for others by caring for them and helping to alleviate their suffering that they often experienced in their own flesh. And ultimately, children, remember, he gave everything he had to give to help them. In short, this elder who wrote 1 John was saying, church, you have one identity. You serve a God of love. You follow one who taught us how to love. Your identity is this. You are created and called to be people of love. But here's the kicker. Love, not just in words, because anybody can say, oh, I love you in the Lord. I'm so sorry your church kicked you out, but I still love you in the Lord. I'm not going to do much about it, but, love you in the Lord. You are to be people of love in action. The writer goes on to say, if we say we love God, we must love our brothers and our sisters by giving our lives for them as Jesus did for us. This is it. This is to be our identity. It doesn't really matter how spiritual we are. You can be spiritual as the heavens. But if you are ignoring the pain and suffering of those around you, you've lost your way. You've lost your identity. Now, you might be saying, well, Leah, does this mean we all have to go around, climbing up on a cross and being crucified for others? Do we have to pay the ultimate price? I hope not. There are people who have done it. There are people who have done it for you and me. There are people who have done it in MCC for you and me. So I hope not. I think what's far more likely is actually something that in some ways, might be harder. To give our lives every day in the service of love and support of others. I'm not sure which is harder, to die in one day or to live 70 or 80 years trying to live every day in that kind of love. It's a different kind of crucifixion, a different kind of dying to self. Especially when it means dying to ourselves enough to try and put ourselves in someone else's shoes. That is the hardest one of all, isn't it? And yet when you've done it, and when I've done it, isn't it just one of the most powerful things ever? This is what a small group of us here at this church tried to do a few months ago as we participated in a study group here at MCC of the Palm Beaches on the book called America's Original Sin, Racism, White Privilege, and the Bridge to a New America by Jim Wallace, who writes from his own standpoint as a white, male, heterosexual Christian. And it was someone who participated in that book study who wrote out our sermon by request today, which is, what is a Christian response to racism? Now, I know that this is a terribly, terribly difficult topic. It is so complex, especially in this country. It can be so overwhelming and so divisive that some of you have probably already checked out and are thinking about the potluck because it's a lot more fun to think about. At least those of us who are white have that privilege to check out, because people who aren't white can't ever check out. And I will be the first to say, wow, I don't have all the answers. It's all so incredibly complex with so many layers. But today, I just want to offer this one response to racism. The one, I believe, that is firmly the only Christian response to racism. Still with me? Here it is. The Christian response to racism. Do something! Do something. Love like Jesus. It is not enough. I'll speak to those of us who are white, because I'm very white. If you've ever seen me in shorts, I'm really white. It is not enough for us to go around and say, well, I'm not racist. I'm trying to love everybody. That does nothing. 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 First thing you can do, say, oh, yeah, I might be racist. Maybe I should learn more about it. Just don't be defensive if you can, because no one's attacking you. It's the whole big thing. Those of us who are white just say, maybe I should try and educate myself. And then the next thing to not do is don't go to a person of color and say, hey, will you teach me about this? It is not the job of people of color to teach those of us who are white about racism. Believe me, they're sick of it. They don't want to talk about it anymore. They might want to. I shouldn't speak for people of color, but I'll just say if I was, I'd probably be like, yeah, go read a book. So that's one thing we can do, and I'm going to have some suggestions for that. But the point is, we need to do something, because 1 John says we're supposed to love like Jesus, and Jesus showed us how to love by giving his life for us. He didn't just say it. He went around and he touched people, and he healed people, and he loved them unconditionally, and he reached out to those who were on the margins and the most vulnerable and the most hated in his society. That's how Jesus showed his love. So we're supposed to love like that by doing. Can I get an amen? We can give up our own lives by trying to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. Maybe we could try to stop arguing and just listen to each other. Listen. And especially listen to the voices of those who are suffering. In 2018, we have an endless array of ways to listen. Podcasts, reading online, books, that old-fashioned thing, TV. All kinds of ways to listen. That's a great place to start. There was and is such a tremendous amount of suffering happening that we learn about in this book study, and I just want to share one with you today, and I want to ask you to go down this road with me for a little bit. It is a bleak, bleak road. And you know what? On this, my last of 3 Sundays, this is not like a happy thing that I'd love to be preaching on. I'd love it if this didn't exist at all. But I don't want to leave here and not say these words, because that's not what God called me to do. We're called to right injustice in the world. So just listen with me for a little bit, if you will. I really recommend this book, America's Original Sin. That's why the topic of this sermon is America's Original Sin, or our original sin, the real original sin. I really liked it, and I heartily recommend it. If you really don't know that much about racism in this country, there's probably no better book that you could read. And I thought I kind of knew a lot. I mean, you know, I pride myself on reading and being informed and trying to be a good visionary leader and all that stuff. But I read this book, and I just was blown away by something it talks about called mass incarceration. And I thought I knew a little bit about it. You know, I had heard about the school to prison pipeline, and I knew that the war on drugs has been a disaster and all that, but I didn't know how all the pieces fit together. Mass incarceration is a reality in our country today. Brian Stevenson, an unbelievably amazing human being, a civil rights lawyer, he calls the reality of mass incarceration the new Jim Crow in our country. And this is what mass incarceration is. It means that it is a system of segregation. Remember segregation? Some of you? It is segregation in 2018. Although instead of fountains that say whites only, it's prisons that say black and brown people only. The United States has 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's prisoners. This is a 500% increase over the last 40 years. And it's not due to rising crime rates. It's mainly due to changes in sentencing laws. There are now more African American adults under correctional control, jail, prison, probation, or parole, than were enslaved in this country in 1850, 10 years before the Civil War. 1 out of 3 black men between the ages of 18 and 30 is either in jail, prison, or on probation or parole. 1 in 3. And the vast majority of this huge increase in incarceration is traceable to the arrest and the imprisonment of poor people of color for non-violent, drug-related, just say no offenses. We pass these laws saying, well, the enemy of the people is drugs. But the way the laws have been enacted, we have used it to declare war on people, primarily black and brown people. Are you still in the room? Yes. In some states, African American men have been admitted to prison on drug charges at a rate that is 57 times higher than white men. And although the majority of drug dealers are white, 3/4 of all people imprisoned for drug offenses are Latino or black. And to make matters even worse, and to me this might be the worst part of it all, we have passed laws in many states, especially in the South, that say once you have been convicted of a felony, and even after you have served your prison term, even after you are out on the streets, you've paid your debt to society, you can no longer vote for the rest of your life. Aren't we glad that God doesn't operate like that? How unjust is that? You commit a crime, you go to jail, you pay the penalty, but you can never vote again. Tell me what that is, if not racism. I was just stunned. I was truly stunned. I didn't know it was a horrific problem on this epic scale. And I try not to use the word epic in my sermons now. And I asked myself, how did I not know about this? This is a new form of slavery. Especially now that so many of our prisons are for-profit enterprises. So we have this huge incentive. And now, mass incarceration is such an enormous part of the American economy that if we dismantle this thing we have created, we will cripple the U.S. economy. That's how embedded it is. Now, if you're sitting there saying, yeah, I just want to hear, Jesus, what does this have to do with church? Because 1 John says, how can you have the world's goods? How can you have freedom and privilege and voting power and not use it to help your brothers and sisters who are suffering? If you love God, you must love your brother and sister and give your life for them. That's what it has to do with church. The despair that this reality is causing in communities of color is profound. Can you imagine? I know not everyone in this room is gay, but if like say if you're here, you're queer, here we are, at CC. Can you imagine 1 out of 3 men in this room being in prison because we're gay? And then maybe you get a 10-year sentence for that, and you get out and you can never vote again because you're gay? That's what this is. Now I'll tell you, put this next to the Brown children who've been separated from their parents at the border, the 500 who still haven't been reunited with their families, the horrible conditions, and I just kind of want to go get in bed and pull the covers over my head and never, ever, ever see the light of day again. Anybody with me? It's like, oh my gosh, I can't. But again, I have that privilege because it's not happening to me. Somebody's got to do it. Will we give our lives? Will we give our lives to love? Will we give our lives so this little girl will know that she is as precious in God's sight as any other white child on this planet? John 3:17. I think it's very interesting. Christians love to quote John 3:16, right? Everyone know that one? For God so loved the world that God gave God's only begotten Son, right? It's always at football games. Christians love John 3:16, but somehow we forget 1 John 3:17. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? How are any of us calling ourselves followers of Jesus? How are these 700 churches in Palm Beach County not totally up in arms about this nightmare? And I'm right there with it. It's like, this is my first sermon to preach on this. So let's get to something a little more hopeful, shall we?
Yes.
I loved meeting with Devaya and Darren and Leo yesterday. We sat around for a couple of hours and we talked about their experiences of racism. And to a person, every one of them has been denigrated because of their color, told they weren't smart because of their color, told they didn't belong in this country because of their color. And some of that has happened here in this place. this church. If we who are white do not wake up and realize this is not about us individually so much, we don't have to be defensive, but we got to listen and educate ourselves and do something. We cannot call ourselves followers of Jesus, at least in my mind, in my heart, in my life. What I loved about the presentation Sarah Helen made is it started with those pictures. Horrible pictures. Families separated at the border. People of color, so many in prison. But yet it moved towards, I know what love is, and this is what it moves to. And these amazing human beings who are flying, right? Oprah Winfrey. Okay, we're not all going to be Oprah. We might try, but, amazing human beings, because that's who anybody can become when there's enough love, and when they know and they're told over and over again that they are worthy, and they have gifts to give, and they are just as wonderful as anyone else God created, no matter what their color. And that is the point. That's what love can do. And that's why I love meeting with these young kids. And I told them, I'm sorry to call you kids, but I'm 53. It's what it is. So I met with them, and I'll just be honest, y'all. They were, we were working in here yesterday, and they were a little nervous and a little giggly and everything, and I sat them down and I used some not very good language, right? And I said, I am so mad about what's going on and how the challenges they're facing that they should never have to face. This is not funny. This is serious. I want them to know that in this church we believe they are people of great power and gifts to give and blessing, and that they are God's blessing to us. I want in this place for them to know that. And I believe that that is the deepest desire of our heart, because no matter what our shortcomings are, I believe and have known this church for nearly 8 years to be a place of great compassion. People who are flawed, but people who want to do what's right. Amen? Amen. So don't give up hope. Because I'll tell you what, if enough of us get mad, and if enough of us say this is wrong, and if enough of us in the name of Jesus say this must stop, it will. That's how you and I got here today. Troy Perry standing up and saying, yeah, no, this is not cool. We're not having this kind of treatment for LGBT people. It's going to be different. And enough people joined him, and it has gradually become different. Still have a long way to go, but we're getting there, right? I'd like to say we've made the same progress with racism, but frankly, the Jim Crow that used to exist, the one that exists now, it's huge, and it needs all of us. And we can do it if we are willing to love like Jesus with our lives and with our action. I want to close this morning with a story. I highly recommend the TED Talk by Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy. And in that TED Talk, he is a civil rights attorney, and he has founded an amazing organization called the Equal Rights Initiative. And at one point when he was in Montgomery, Alabama, he knew the woman, Virginia Durr, who, she's a white woman, and her husband had represented Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Virginia called up Brian one day and said, Rosa Parks is coming to town. She's my scene stealer. That's okay. Virginia Durr, a white woman whose husband represented Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She called up Brian Stevenson one day. He was, of course, much younger. And she said, Brian, Rosa Parks is coming into town, and I'm going to have her over for tea. Would you like to come over? We're just going to talk together, so would you like to come over and listen? And he said, yes, ma'am, I would like to come there. And she said, great, what are you going to do when you get here? And he said, I'm going to listen. And he just sat there and he listened. And finally, after listening to them talk and sharing all their wisdom and their experiences, Rosa Parks looked at Brian Stevenson and said, now tell me, Brian, what is it you're doing with this Equal Rights Initiative, Equal Justice Initiative? He talked about all the many, many injustices that his organization is trying to address. Mass incarceration, throwing 13-year-olds in prison for the rest of their lives, all the sentencing laws that are so unjust, thing after thing after thing after thing. And Rosa Parks said, that's going to make you tired, tired, tired. And then Virginia Durr said, that's right. And that's why you have to be brave, brave, brave. We got to be brave, brave, brave. And if you don't know where to start, I want to ask you today before you leave, go to the connection table, and you're going to find there one page that if you do the things on this page, none of which are insurmountable, you can make a difference. And we can love like Jesus in a way that can truly change things. And you might remember a few sermons ago, these are out there too. These signs, keep families together. What we can do about what's happening at the border. These are on the connection table too. Take them with you. But perhaps most of all, take this. Our identity is to be people of love. To love like Jesus. To give our lives away by doing something. And being brave, brave, brave. Fortunately, Jesus has already shown us the way. Amen.